Good day, everyone. Today we will be discussing the history of Marco. I'm going to go ahead. Mr. Mark Needles is going to give you all of that wonderful information that comes with the history of Marco. So there you go.
Good afternoon. We're going to share the history of Marco in modern day. We're not going to get into the Calusa Indians as you might want to do at some time. I would suggest that if you haven't already done so, that you may want to visit the museum. And there's a lot of information that we're talking about here, but also about the Marco Island development that did the development as you know it today. I'm going to go through this. This slide here was provided after a number of years, and people said, why don't, before they even got started, their thought is, why do we have to even go through this? What's the value, and what do we care about the history of Marco Island? So I thought I would share that with you a little bit, because a lot of people say, what's the value there? And there are many benefits. Obviously here from knowledge is power, and knowledge establishes credibility, knowledge creates confidence. And my years, and I've been doing this since been on Marco Island since 1969. I will share a little bit of information with you about my history here shortly. But I have over the years found that working with clients, it has always been beneficial to me because people have an interest in what's the history of Marco. How did Marco get to where it is today, or how did the developers end up developing Marco Island? So there's a lot of great value there when you're dealing with the customer, and it creates a lot of credibility for you in dealing with prospective buyers and homeowners here in Marco Island. Before I get into the Mackles and the development, I'd like to share a little bit with you. I started in 1969 as a gopher, and before I go that far, let me explain to you that this program generally is presented with a lot of exchange of ideas and Q&A. And I try to do that because there's a lot of times you have questions that aren't covered in in these sessions. And I'd like to be able, if you're sitting there thinking of something, what about this, what happened there? And I'd like to share that with you. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do that. But we're going to try and cover as much of this as possible. I started in 1969 as a gopher. If everybody knows what a gopher is. I started my job, and someone said, go for this and go for that. I started my job with Deltona Corporation, who were the developers of Marco Island. And I received a weekly allotment of $90 a week. Some thought I was overpaid at that. Discovered that they hired my wife shortly thereafter that for $95 a week, and she was answering the phones. So you can see the value of my job wasn't highly significant. A year later, I got my real estate license and joined the sales staff with the Deltona Corporation. And I was one of 13 gentlemen. They did not hire women back then. Today, the women pretty much dominate the sales market in real estate, and much to everybody's surprise, they're much more successful than many of the guys. That has to do with motivation, a lot of other things that go along with it. My success has been over the years because I work hard, and I have continued to do so. I started a real estate company, which I'll get back to the history in a minute, called Flagship Real Estate Corporation in 1973, and operated for about 43 years, until I was approached by John R. Wood, and they were trying to make inroads to Marco Island, and we had a very successful operation. Timing was great, and so I now work for John R. Wood. But in that interim, I was involved in building homes under the name of Flagship Homes, and we had about 300 properties we represented in under Flagship Vacation Properties representing owners and handling short-term rentals. So that's been my history, and here I am today. And I've been doing this since the inception of the Board of Realtors here. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy doing it more when there's people to talk to and get feedback from. But that being said, we're going to get back into the history now. The Mackel brothers, this is Elliot on the left, Robert in the middle, and Frank Jr. On the right-hand side. These gentlemen come from a family of developers in Florida. They developed Key Biscayne over in Miami, ultimately coming to this coast and doing other developments throughout the state of Florida. Have an excellent reputation for quality throughout the state. And because of that, the Collier family that owned the property known as Marco Island now, and a lot of the area around, like most of Collier County, had approached these gentlemen and suggested they might want to come over here and look at this and look at the development potential of Marco Island and surrounding area. They did so in the early 1960s. They came over and they were known for several things. One of creating developments and communities, not just developing land and trying to sell it and hope something happens. Every one of their developments throughout the state of Florida had was pre-designed for commercial, church sites, as well as residential, and various other community-related activity sites. So their success rate was second to none in the state of Florida, and they had a reputation second to none in the state of Florida. Their offices were over in Key Biscayne, in Coral Gables. And interesting enough, as many executives, they have their own private offices. These gentlemen had one big office, and they were all in this together. They had no secrets from each other, and they operated. Frank Jr. on the right-hand side was a spokesperson for the Mackel brothers, but all three of them made the decision, so it wasn't just a one-party decision. The development of Marco Island was created, let me go back again. Mackel brothers developed this area and been in the development business previously under the name of General Development, and they have been Port Charlotte and several others. And from the way the stories go, they kind of lost control of the quality, and so they decided to sell out, and they reformed a company called the Deltona Corporation. From the namesake of Deltona Community, which is located between Orlando and Daytona Beach. If you're not familiar with it, if you're driving from Orlando on 4 and going northeast, you go right by Deltona, the city of Deltona. When they came to Marco Island, they had a master plan for the entire area. And I'm not sure whether, I do have a pointer here. If you'll notice this orange area, this is what ultimately developed. If you will note up in here, when we're in this area, this is unit 24. Now, if you were to look on the development of all, the legal description of all of Marco Island that Deltona developed is known as Marco Beach Subdivision, MBS. And they have various units, unit 1, 2, 3, 4, through 25. However, unit 24 was never developed because unit 24 was this area that I mentioned over in here. That's unit 24. It never got developed. It didn't get developed because the Corps of Engineers put a halt to any development in that area. And we'll go on to discuss that in a minute. Unit 24, which was not part of the numbering system, is located that's unit 24 up there. Unit 25, which is here on Marco Island, is the area kind of surrounding the YMCA and Echo Park. And that was later, that property was later purchased and developed after the original development was established. But I mean, you know, here, at this area up in here, that is identified as Unit 30. And Unit 30 was to be further development, and all of this area was to be developed similar to Marco Island in its canal systems and access to the Gulf of Mexico. If you also note that over in here, there is an airport and a golf course. And maybe you can't see that from your perspective, but that's what that says on this map. And that was to be a future location of golf courses and airports. Since that time, now keep on that, this area in here, Big Key, is known as the development area, and that never got developed because of the Corps of Engineers denial of permits, as well as this area over here, which is identified as Blue Hill development area, that didn't get developed because of the Corps of Engineers. And of course, you see Goodland, which has nothing to do with Marco Island. Ultimately, this area down here, Kais Island, which is to the south, was again part of the master plan that never happened. Of the entire master plan, which is all this area that you'll see in green or color coordinated, it was not developed other than the orange that's identified here, which is existing. There are some areas over in here, which is where the school, high school is, and Key Marco down in here, which is originally the name of Horse Island. That's H-O-R-S Island. Okay, continuing on. This is what ultimately was made complete. You can see Key Marco here, and then all the rest of the island that was developed. Not all of the area was developed by the Deltona Corporation. There are a few areas that were not. One of is Old Marco Village, which is to the very north, and Hideaway Beach was not, and that was developed by Toronto Development out of Canada. All of these areas are indicative of how Deltona and the Mackel brothers developed properties. If you notice the different colors, some of it, like on the beach, this is all zoned for multifamily. Some of it was zoned for hotels. Most of it was zoned, ironically, for hotels, not condominiums. And you can see various church sites. And the history of the church sites in the Deltona Corporation throughout all their developments was that they would donate a school site, and they would also, as a congregation came together and was looking to develop a home for their worship services, Deltona would donate that property to the congregation. All the yellow is obviously, not obviously, but it is single family homes. Some of the area was not developed. Some of this area over here, green, never got developed. Down in here never got developed. And one never will, because the Corps of Engineers denied permits, and there was certain agreements that the Mackel brothers and Deltona Corporation had to sign off on, and created some preserves area for the future preservation of the wetlands. If you don't have one of these maps, you can get them either at the City of Marco Island. They can order it for you if they don't have them in stock, or you can get it at Collier County Building Services. So I recommend one. I have one at my desk. We have several in the office as well, but they're very beneficial. This location here is kind of unique. This was the first building that you saw. When I first moved here, there was no Collier Boulevard coming from 41 down to the Jolly Bridge and over Marco. There was no Jolly Bridge for that matter. To get to Marco, from Naples, you'd have to go all the way down to Royal Hammock, which is down the end of San Marco Road on the mainland in 41, and then come in that way. And coming across, there was a swing bridge. And literally, when we first arrived here, the bridge was closed because somebody, a bridge tender, was walking around in circles, cranking the bridge closed because a boat had just passed. And that was our introduction. And that's the only way you could get to Marco originally. Since that time, a new bridge has been built in not only the Jolly Bridge, but also at the bridge in Goodland. But coming across to Marco, when I crossed that Goodland Bridge, a swing bridge, and you came to about this area, and I'll show you where this area is in a minute, but this was the first thing that you saw. This was the actually sales center, administration building for the Deltona Corporation. As I say, part of the sales staff, we were working out of the site. We had several rooms to show people, private rooms. We also had a big display of Marco on the floor. And it was the beginning of how Marco Island got presented to the public. I wanted to go back a step a little bit because Deltona, the Mackel brothers' success had a lot to do with their franchise system. They had over 100 franchisees throughout the United States and in some in Europe and some in the Far East. Usually the franchisees in Europe and the Far East were targeted to military personnel who ultimately would be retiring, investing, and coming back to the United States to make their retirement here in Florida. Throughout the United States, they had franchisees who were representing the real estate here of not only Marco, but other developments of the Mackel brothers and Deltona Corporation. The other developments were known as the Three Seasons developments. Now, somebody usually in the audience says, "Oh, what's Three Seasons mean?" Well, as Floridians, we kind of say we don't have a winter, so there's only 3 seasons in Florida. Excuse me. Now, I can tell you, I had two kids that went and graduated from Florida State in Tallahassee. And in my opinion, they have winter up there. It's not long, but they do have it. Since then, I've got a grandson there too. So he hasn't experienced the winter yet. But anyway, getting back to the franchisees, they would end up trying to promote Marco Island, a real estate franchisee, would try to sell them here. Those franchisees were actually local brokers in various towns, Chicago, Boston, New York, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, you name it. There was franchisees all over, and they were generally real estate offices. And they would have sales agents that would be specializing in the Three Seasons as well as the Marco Island property. When these people wanted to buy, a lot of times they wanted to come down and say, "Oh, we want to see what that looks like." So they would end up coming down to visit Marco, and it was usually on a weekend. And on the weekend, we would show them around Marco Island. I was part of the job site sales staff because the other agents from out of the country or out of the state were not able by Florida law to show people around. Excuse my voice. So as a job site sales agent, we were responsible for showing the people around and showing them everything and talking to them about the future, what Marco is anticipated to be. So this was the place to do that. Location, obviously, is the fire safety department and the fire department is now right next door to the City Hall. City Hall, some people usually ask me, does anybody know what the origin of City Hall was? And most people would say, don't know. There was actually a bank built there. And that building had a bank in it initially, and then ultimately when the city ended up incorporating. They bought that building from the bank and ultimately developed that whole property, including having the fire station put there. I mentioned people would come down from the north to see what this property was about. They weren't committed necessarily. They would get the opportunity. They would have a contract that was subject to viewing. And they would come down here and they would like it. And it was our job as job site salesmen, salesmen, because we're women, today it would be salespeople, persons, to show the property around, show people around. This is where we put the people. Beltona typically, or Mackles typically did developments in the middle of nowhere. If you were to go to some of these sites, today they're close to metropolitan areas. But at the time, they're usually in fairly isolated areas because the cost of land was fairly inexpensive in those. So what they had to do, they had to build a hotel or a motel in this case, similar to what you see here. And this is what was built here in Marco. If you'll note that, I'm going to use the over in here, see that, and I'm going to chase this over. These were two typical hotel rooms, motel rooms, two-story in here, and then there was a restaurant in this building. And then these were little villas, 1 and 2 bedroom villas. In the middle, they had a little pitch and putt golf course right on the Gulf of Mexico. This is Collier Boulevard. If you see Collier Boulevard going this way, it stopped right at the hotel. Today, the Marriott, second building of the Marriott sits right in here. The first one was built next to that. If you look up in here, this is a road that went all the way from San Marco Road all the way down to the south end of the island on Caxamas Pass. This up in here, does anybody know? Somebody asked the question. But that was the first airstrip on Marco Island. The second airstrip ended up being a little bit further north, what is now known as Marquesas Court. And that was accessible initially from San Marco Road. This was put in here for a couple of reasons, one of which the Mackles had not a private plane, but a corporate plane. I think they had 2 of them, and they ended up flying in, coming in here for various conferences and meetings and so on. But in addition, they were very much into marketing, and one of the marketing targets was small aircraft owners. And many times people would fly in and they would come in to see what Marco Island was about. On some of the magazines, which I'm not familiar with, that cater to or target private aircraft, they were advertising in those. I actually had a situation where somebody flew in. I was on the sales floor, if you will, and I got a call to go down the airstrip. I go down there, I meet these people, I take them a tour of Marco Island, and literally in 4 hours, they bought a spec home, which was half done, and got in their plane and left. Picked colors and everything. I thought, well, this job is going to be easy. Well, it wasn't so easy, ultimately. You have to work at it. So anyway, that's pretty much what this is all about. They did add a little conference area in here. You can follow this, it's right in here. And that probably was used more for religious services than it was for any conferences, because there wasn't much conference business. Okay? 2 things really added the value to Marco Island from the perspective of the public. One of them you see the beginning of here, which is the Jolly Bridge. If you note in here, you can see Marco on the far side, upper right-hand corner, and down in the lower end is the beginning of this coming off of the mainland. What you see over in here is typically the way much of Marco Island was created. This is a dredge that's right in this position here. If you're not seeing the cursor here, I'm going to point to it right there. That typically digs down or sucks bottom of the water bottom, if you will, and pumps it through a series of tubes that are on floats and end up with the material coming out in here. Marco at one time had 4 dredges running at the same time on Marco Island. There was only 7 of its kind in the United States, and 4 of them were operating here at the same time. It was a very difficult situation to develop Marco because there was so much to develop, and there was only the permits were on a time frame. And Marco Island was divided into several different development areas so they could make an application for the permit. I want to say that, point out that the permit process for the entire project had been approved by local authorities, which was Collier County, the state of Florida, and the federal government had all signed off on this. However, the federal permitting process would only allow for certain times. So they had to stage the different developments in a timely fashion, so they couldn't go in and do everything at once. And they only were given a couple of years for each permit. So they divided it up in permit area A, B, C, D, and so on. That being said, as they began this process, and I'm going beyond what you see here, they ultimately came to the Corps of Engineers, request of the Corps of Engineers for one of the permits that ended up creating a situation where about a third of Marco never did develop, which, stay tuned, we're going to get there. You see here, this is the beginning of the bridge. This is one thing that encouraged people to come to Marco Island from Naples, because before then, to come from Naples here was all the way down 41 to San Marco. And most people in Naples say, what's on Marco Island? And they would say, well, there's not much down there. It's a pain in the ass to get there. And if you want to get there, then don't bother. There's a lot of other things there in Naples, including housing. So there's a lot of people coming here to actually buy houses from the Naples marketing. Early on, a lot of us that had our own companies, we didn't market much in Naples at all because there just wasn't that many people in Naples that had a desire to come this far south. That changed in the later years. As you see in your invention, this allowed a lot of activity, a lot of traffic to flow down here. Some people think that that was probably a mistake, but from the perspective of creating a community, it was a great thing to happen. One other thing that people don't realize, when Jolly Bridge was first built, it was a toll bridge. It was 40 cents coming and going each way. It wasn't just 40 cents one way. And ultimately, they reduced that down to 20 cents each way. And later on, they discovered, because it was a bond issue that had been written to underwrite this, they discovered that they had collected more money than what the bond was. So what they had to do is put those funds aside for the future, maybe a second bridge next door to the first bridge, which was a 2 lanes. So, but there was a toll road on that to make that happen. Okay. This is a different phase of it. You can see one of the things that you notice down in here, this strip in here, that was a fishing pier. And that was built as well as one on the other side. This is on the Collier County side. There was one on the Marco Island side. Recognizing that the city jurisdiction is right in the middle of that bridge. So once you get halfway on this side of it, you're in Collier County. On the other side, it has to do with the city of Marco Island under the government. One of the issues that came about years ago was that people used to fish. Fishing was a big issue back in the 50s and 60s here. And originally, and then I usually get into a little bit more than this, I don't want to touch too much on it, but once air conditioning, believe it or not, became an issue, became fashionable, a lot more people came here for fishing. And the location of bridges were such that people were fishing off of the bridges and not so much off of the mainland. And there would be a lot of accidents happening because people were fishing. There was more people fishing, more people than they had anticipated. And as I say, the air conditioning issue, my parents had moved to St. Petersburg Beach back in the early 50s. We moved into a brand new home. I think it was a 2-bedroom, one bath. It had air conditioning. Air conditioning back then in a modern house was a 30-inch fan in the hallway, sucking air, and you open your window in the bedroom, and it would bring air through the window across you, and that was air conditioning in the 50s. Can't imagine that today, but we're all accustomed to the nice clean air as we have right now. So anyway, as things progress, more and more people are coming here, and ultimately the fishing thing. So the legislators said, we got to do something about this. These are dangerous. So any new bridges, and we're going to start any repairs to bridges, we're going to start requiring that these catwalks, which is what they were known as, we're going to be required, which that's what we had. Why the law has changed, I'm not sure, or where it's gone, I don't know. But when Wilma came by, and I think it was 2005, I believe, early 2000, Wilma ended up removing the structure of these things. Now, when the second phase of the bridge, second span, came about, this was during the Obama administration, right after the big recession, and the regulation or the administration in Washington said, if it's shovel ready, which means the plans are already there, all we got to do is fund it, then here's the money. And that's where this bridge was, the second part of the John Bridge, was ready to go. They just didn't have the funds for it. So that's how we got the second one. The story that I've heard, and I've heard it from pretty good sources, was in the bidding process, the low bidder got it, but the bidding process was to include catwalks. It wasn't discovered until after the fact that the catwalks were included in the low bidder's bid. So today we don't have that. Give you a little history back. I was on the city planning board for the first 15 years of Marco Island being the city. And one of the things that we looked at and we put on the wish list, and from what I understand it's still there, is that there would be a catwalk on the other side, Marco side, to be sometime in the future to have a fishing pier under the Jolly Bridge. You know, things are changing constantly at the city council and the city government, so I'm not familiar with it anymore. But if I guess that it may still be there, but it's long on the priority list. In some of the development areas, and I'm going to try and pinpoint some areas here. This area over in here is Landmark Bay. If you probably can't see it, and I can barely see it, but there is a dredge operating in the middle of that bay. And all these dots in here along this area are seawall slabs that are piled high. Typically what they would do pour concrete on the pad in the form. Once it cures, take it off or plastic down, put another form, and then just stack them up 8, 10 high, and then ultimately put the seawalls. That's where they made the seawalls. That's what you see there. One of the issues to be aware of that over in that area and all along the landmark, going all the way up and down, they had to dig quite deep because they didn't have enough fill to create land. So they had to go deeper and deeper. And at one time it was as much as 40 feet deep in the bay here. And what happened was with the seawall, and hopefully you've already had the seawall presentation, but early seawalls were falling in because of the tie rods breaking, deteriorating, and ultimately they would break and go over the top into the water. In this particular area, the problem wasn't that, it was all this, the base that holds this bottom of the seawall was draining back into the middle because it was so deep. So literally the bottom had no place to, nothing holding it. So it was towing out. And there was a lot of loss of seawalls from that. So they ended up doing riprap, which are large rocks. I think you've probably already covered that, to keep the base of that seawall slab in place. So if you're looking at that out in that area, certainly you want to have someone do an inspection of the seawalls. Speaking of seawall inspections, I'm not a fan of getting a seawall inspection from just any company. There's some reputable seawall companies, and most of them do a fairly good job. But if you want to really know what the condition of the seawall is, have an engineer do it. An engineer, usually they'll charge you $200, $300, $400. But you know, you're talking about a situation where replacement of seawalls can be anywhere from $350 to $500 a foot, and very costly. So I always recommend to my clients that, you know, looking at possibility of $50,000, $70,000, $80,000 to replace a seawall, and for a few $100s, you can get some assurances that either it has to be done or it doesn't need to be done in the future. Excuse me. So one other thing, and while I'm talking about inspections, one of the things that I've found over the years is people come in here with some idea of having a boat in their backyard. And this is one of the times when I kind of do a spin off and go in another direction. But I want to make sure that this gets covered. I think it's important if you're dealing with a prospect who wants to know, who wants to have a boat in their backyard, you want to know what kind of a boat they're expecting. If you're trying to show them houses on the water and their mind is, I want to have a 60-foot yacht, and they're looking at the end of the canal, it isn't going to work. So I always make it a point to ask people, what's your perception of your boating days here? I had one person, I asked that question. He said, well, I've seen these pontoon boats. My idea is about 5 o'clock after work, I'm going to go on the pontoon boat. I'm going to get a scotch in one hand and maybe the bottle in the other hand, and I'm going to go putt, putt, putt up and down the waterways. You ever want to go to the Gulf? No, I don't want to do that. It's my idea of boating. So we found a place that worked for everything else. So they didn't need to have a particular thing. Certain boats will not fit on all waterways. You may not have gotten this information anyplace else, but the standard waterway is 100 feet wide that under Deltona's development. 100 feet wide is the minimum width of the seawall. The by right for a dock is 25 feet into that waterway, not to exceed 25%. Now the 25% now applies to Old Marco Village, where the waterway is only 60 feet wide. Most I'm going to call them feeder waterways, which where there's a lot more potential boat traffic, are typically 150 feet wide. So if they're thinking about a boat, keep that in mind and try it the best way. Say, send them to the city of Marco Island. The city over there is very good on it. They've also got a lot of other information related to that, such as bridge heights. You can actually go online, cityofmarcoisland.com, and find what the bridge heights are. So if somebody wants to have a certain kind of a boat, let's see if they can get under a bridge, go to cityofmarcoisland.com. You can find out, or they can find out. I would suggest you not do some of this stuff for them other than give them advice or get a printout of something, because you don't want to be responsible. Being on the planning board, a good example, we had somebody that came and they were looking for a variance. And there are certain variances that were available for boat docks. In this particular case, somebody came in with a large boat and they couldn't get it into the house, the lot that where they built their house. And so they asked for variance, and there was no ability to give a variance. Keep in mind, the variance for a boat dock was solely in the hands of the planning board. The city council had no say-so. If you want a variance for building a home or a setback for a home, it has to go through the planning board and then the city council. We were able to look at these variances from the planning board, and this person came and there was just no flexibility in our ability for a variance, and the city council didn't have that say. And the guy said, what do we do? He said, we need to go find another house or change your boat. And the downside of it is, when I heard, he did go find another house, but he didn't use that same realtor that he got the first house from. So suggest you follow up on that. Okay, back here. Like I said, I did get off on tangents, but first airstrip was down here, which is Landmark. Then it got moved over in here. Excuse me. And this was the second one right in here. And you can see an access road from San Marco. This area right here is no longer accessible from San Marco. Actually, it's accessible over here from Goldenrod. Another thing in here, we are located right now about in here, right in here. Condos are all around this area right now. And City Hall is right up in here. Let's see what else. We got the beginning of condos here. One of the first condos is down here on the bottom. I would ask you if you can see that from back there, but apparently you can't answer. So I'm just going to assume you can't. So this in here is a Seabreeze. Next to that is the second project of garden units, Seabreeze South. They went on over here in the middle of the mangroves here to Seabreeze West, across the street to Aquarius, and then southwards. All of those complexes, the buildings and the units, are identical. You've got the floor plan for one, you've got the floor plan for all. They have 2 bedrooms on the end, 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, up and down. 1 bedroom, up and down, and then efficiencies in the middle. Every building is the same. They change the exterior to look different, colors, some designs. So remember that if you got the floor plan for one, they're all identical. At this point, I would be asking, does anybody know what the first beachfront condo is? It is the Emerald Beach, which is at the very bottom down in here. I don't know whether you can see it. It's right here. And next to that, it was built by the Deltona Corporation. And next to that was this Sunset House. And then subsequent to that was the Sunset North, which was right to the north of the Sunset House. They were identical from the colors to the trim to everything else. There was only one change that was ever done. And if you're walking on the beach, you'll be able to see this. The Sunset House had windows in this, there's a stairwell in the very front of the face of the Gulf. There's a stairwell there, fire escape. First one had, in Sunset House, had windows in it. They changed the fire requirements to not allow windows in a fire escape. So if you were to walk on the beach, you would see the distinction of that. Now they're different colors and so on, but that's the only distinction originally. You can notice in here some of the waterfront. This picture was about, I'm going to say about 1968 maybe, probably about 1968. I moved here in 1969, and the pink buildings, which is Seabreeze South, had just been completed, and I was one of the first tenants in it, not as an owner, but as a renter. Excuse me. Okay, it pretty much covers, I want to touch one other thing. The reason this area here was pretty well developed that early on, the development schedule the Deltona Corporation had was in different phases. They had some areas that were basically either ready or would be ready for the deeding in 90 days. They had some others, excuse me, that would be 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, actually 5.5 and 8.5 years. So this area in here was known as a cash area. And when you came in interested and you wanted to build a house pretty quickly, you could build it in that area. But you weren't obligated to build under a Mackel house. The Mackel brothers also had a division of single-family home development, and they were contractors. They had an area called the housing area, which I'll show you in a different area, where if you wanted to buy a lot in there, be that location, you had to buy a house lot combination. Okay, let's move along. This area in here, you can see this whole area. This area in the middle here was just developed and finished off. Along with, just prior to that, this area over here, which is where the South Seas complex is. If you'll see the South Seas, this is the South Seas east here, the 3 mid-rises and then gardens that are in between them. This area up in here, this was part of the, dredge and fill permit process that ultimately brought the Deltona Corporation and the Mackel brothers to their knees, so to speak. It was time for a new development or a new permit process. They submitted a permit for this area as well as where South Seas is and Summer Tiger Tail. And Corps of Engineers, which is typically in the previous permitting process, was pretty much a rubber stamp issue because everything else had been approved. Then came was a new movement, the Environmental Protection Movement, and a new agency called the EPA, and Environmental Protection Agency, had come on board, and they said, wait a minute, that's pretty sensitive land that we're talking that's around there. So they said, okay, let's talk about that. So the Corps of Engineers said, well, we can have public hearings. They said, okay, let's do that. So the Corps of Engineers scheduled public hearings for the permit of this area, and some of it you can't see. There was one area that was fairly significant in size to hold these, and that was Lely High School Auditorium, which seats, I think it was about 1,000 people. And during that process, there was different factions, the environmental group, and then there was another group, pro-development. And I happen to be part of the pro-development group as president of the Chamber of Commerce here on Marco. And we met with Deltona and their representatives, their attorneys, We met with people, representatives of the Naples City Council, Collier County Commission. All those were supporters of the continuation of what Deltona was originally planned for Marco Island development. On the other side were environmental groups, and they had come from all over, from as far away as Oregon, Washington, California, and so on. And so they kind of created their own group. And as it turned out, they didn't really care about Marco Island. And this is where I would say, what did they care about? But the development that I mentioned before, which was Unit 24, up in the north end, which was north of Isles of Capri, that was to be the next phase of development. And much of that had already been sold to individuals such as yourself, myself, investors who were going to build commercial property, multifamily, and so on. And what happened was their concern, and we got to know this because we got to know some of these people. It's like the two attorneys getting together, and they're fighting each other in court, and then after it's all over and the case is settled, they go and have a drink together or maybe have dinner together. We weren't that close to these people. We exchanged ideas and we knew what they wanted. And of course they knew what we wanted. As it turns out, they didn't care about that. Their concern was Rookery Bay Sanctuary, which was north of what was to be known as Marco Shores, or Unit 24. They didn't care about Marco, but their position was, look, if we fight Marco, and we're probably not going to win, but at least we've got a foothold in protecting Rookery Bay Sanctuary against development right up against it, which was the Marco Shores, or Unit 24. As it turned out, Corps of Engineers and ultimately Deltona came to an agreement saying, okay, we're not going to do that up there. But we're also not going to be able, the state and the federal government said, you're not going to do about a third of the island to the east, which was, as I mentioned before, the Big Key area and Blue Hill area, which was by Goodland. So they ended up saying, okay, you can do certain things, and this area in here became approved, as did the property where the South Seas is. And there was a lot of other things that happened. As an example, in Barfield Bay, or Roberts Bay, there's an island out in the middle that didn't used to be. One of the things was required, they had to create a mangrove island. So they ended up creating a mangrove island there, and that's what those mangroves are. It was a man-made mangrove island. There were some other areas, the bridge going over into Tiger Tail Beach didn't used to be there. It was actually, water was stopped on either side, so there was no flow back and forth. They required Deltona to go buy back lands that had been sold for single-family homes and buy that back and create a bridge over there and allow water to flow through. There was several areas on the island, which I'm not going to touch all of that because it could go on forever. But there were several things to be agreed on. Ultimately, the win-win for Deltona was they were going to be able to take the area to the north of on the other side of the Jolly Bridge and make that a development up in there at some future date. Because of the losses that Deltona took and the Mackle brothers took, they had started selling things off, one of which was the Marco Beach Hotel, which is now the Marriott, which I'll touch base on in a moment. They ended up selling many beachfront properties, which they had not intended to. They intended to develop those themselves. They also ended up having property on the other side of the new airport is, which ultimately was what Deltona built, which is now Carter County Airport, or known as Mark Wyden Airport in Carter County. And that area up in there, Hammond Bay, ended up, they sold that land to a developer, and the developer, the CI, ended up doing the development up there, including redoing the Marco Shores Golf Course, which used to be Deltona, now it's Hammond Bay Golf Course. In addition to that, a lot of Fiddler's Creek was part of going to be what they call kind of tagged as Upland Marco. As it turned out, they ended up selling that to the developer of Fiddler's Creek as well. And so then a lot of things had happened because of the Corps of Engineers. So just some scenes of, excuse me, Murray development. Right. We're talking all day. You can see down here at the bottom, you can see where the bridge ultimately would empty onto it by the yacht club, which was non-existent at that time. And going along over in the middle, along this row in here, these are model homes. Now, everybody, if you've never sat on a model home, you may do very well or you may not do very well. In this particular case, we didn't do very well because there was no bridge. People weren't coming down and weren't driving by. But yet, as the sales agent for Deltona, we would each be assigned there, and they had an office in the middle. And I point this out because you will see a couple of homes here later that were part of the original of that. Those model homes. It was 14 of them. This is the first here. I'm going to show you this, and you're going to see this in a minute. This is Crescent. And that's where the very first waterfront homes were built. The second waterfront home were over in Willow, which is over here. And if you'll notice, this is North Barfield. Going up in here, just the Martin Court. That's pretty much the end. Ultimately, that will continue over around here, across here, and come out and then into Bald Eagle. But you can see in here, early development, nothing there. Also, Town Center, which is right in here. There's nothing there. And the Esplanade is, I'm sorry, Town Center, yeah, Town Center and Esplanade is ultimately over here. And here's the first models in Crescent, waterfront models. This is Collier Boulevard. Here, ultimately going to the John Bridge. And this was the yacht club facility here, which you can see some in a minute. This is the yacht club. The first yacht phase of the yacht club was the lower roof in here, the real white roof. It was kind of a quaint little place. It was a pretty nice place to just go socialize, have dinner. It turned out, my wife and I ended up being married right here, where that bar is, but this wasn't all here at the time. What I'm going to show you in here, notice the tennis. Marco used to have a tremendous activity in the way of tennis. The hotel, which is down where Mary lives, had, I think, 15 or 18 courts. We had 5 here. We had the racket club, and there was quite a bit of tennis activity. At one time, Pinch Scotch sponsored a tournament for the pros, and some of the top pros were there. They had built stands where the kids were both ball boy and ball girl doing that tennis tournament. Ultimately, one of the things that Deltona had to sell the building, they ended up coming to I'm sorry, permits were denied. They ended up having to sell many properties. Yacht Club was one they sold, and they sold it to a developer. And the developer came in and went to the county and said, okay, we're gonna build these, and here's our idea, the master plan. Very much can't do that. What do you mean you can't do it? Well, you can't have a hotel and have a public restaurant. This is zoned for our own, it should be the resort activity outdoor. So it came up and we went back to the planning stage, and came back and said, okay, this is going to be a boatel. We're not going to let anybody in unless they go in, and they won't be able to eat there unless they go in. So they did that, and they had a master plan that showed all these little motel type of units all over this property. Well, I think that was there for about 2 years, and finally they ended up giving up and saying this isn't working for us. So they ended up selling it, and ultimately they built a fellow by the name of Jack H. Raymond, who had been a major developer on Marco, and ultimately was one of the first people to do mixed-use development on Fifth Avenue in Naples. He bought this and created what is now the yacht club that you see today. I mentioned there was 2 things that really gave Marco a really big jump in public awareness. One was the Jolly Bridge, and the second one was the Marco Beach Hotel and Villas, which was owned by the Macco family. This is it under construction here, and you notice the original motel site over in here that remained for quite a while. And then ultimately, one of the things, and this site in here, they had what they call the Kitty Corps managing this property. And the fellow who's the general manager, Roger Everingham, he had been brought over from Key Biscayne Hotel, which the Maccos also owned that, and brought over here and given pretty much carte blanche to run this thing as a top-notch hotel facility. Within about 3 years, it was the #1 destination for both conference and social business in the state of Florida. I get a lot of business from that because a lot of people came in there and said, wow, look at this place. Look at the Marco Island. And I knew all the Kitty Corps members of the administration over there, and I got a lot of referrals from them for people coming in and wanting to buy. One of the one example, I remember Chrysler introducing their new line back in the early 70s to all their agencies, auto agencies coming in. Jaguar was another one. There was a couple others that I don't remember the names of who it was. Very successful, and but they had to ultimately sell this to what is now the Marriott. And Marriott doesn't really own this. You may or may not know that. But I know it's up for sale. And this is the second tower. This was added later. The first tower, which is what Mac was built. And they had to sell that. And it went up on the market for $30 million. And Marriott wanted to have it. And Marriott is not known for owning real estate or owning the hotels. They're a management company. And now they may own a few properties that I'm not familiar with, but that's stuff in tradition. However, they're in close partnership with Mass Mutual Insurance Company. So when this first came about, Marriott went to Maccos and said, we want that. And the transactions all happened where they ended up getting, Mass Mutual can't act that quickly because they have a big board of directors and so on and so forth. And Marriott was afraid they were going to lose it, so they acted. Later on, Mass Mutual said, okay, we can do this. So they ended up taking Marriott out of it. And Marriott, even today, is the management company. In addition to that, to the north of that, which is over in this area, the Madeira was built, which is a condo. First there was a spa and then Madeira. And Madeira was developed not by Marriott, but by Mass Mutual. which is, you're not familiar with it, very nice property. Okay, I'm going to go on real quickly. The home building goes back quite a way, but we never had a log cabin here. But there was a progression. And this is one of the 1968 models, which I showed you on Collier Boulevard before there was even a Jolly Bridge. And this is a typical house. This was the most popular of the 2-bedroom houses. This was called the Crusader model. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,200 square feet. It included this one-car garage, which was pretty typical back then, and it had a screen porch on the back of it. Then the same house, I shouldn't say the same house, most popular 3-bedroom, it was called the Greenbrier. And that one-car garage, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, had a family room on the back of it, which was kind of like an extension of the living room, wasn't much of a division. It did not have a screen porch. You want a screen porch, that was going to be extra. That house there is on Yellowbird, so it's still there. If you'll notice up in here, the roof lines in here, that's what they call a 512 pitch. And it's kind of low and kind of flat, I would say. And then you go to 612 in here, and you notice the roof line goes up. This was actually one of the homes one of our model homes, flagship homes, that was about 1,800 square feet, one of our more popular houses. And then this is another builder, which has this another stretch. When we first started building homes in the early 1900s, the 512 was pretty typical. Then ultimately, people wanted higher ceilings, so the 612, and then today, some of them, typically, where instead of a 9-foot, 10-foot ceiling, they're 12 and 14 feet. Condos, real briefly, talked about this before. Sea breezes, this was one of the sea breezes, Sea Breeze South, and then you can see in here a little bit better picture than we had before. This is all swampy land in here. And that's the Sea Breeze West. Again, they're all the same. You can see here the Emerald Beach, and then the Sunset House under construction. When I came here in 1969, Sunset North was under construction, and Sunset North was opened up in about late 1969. One of the most popular and does a lot of business there is the South Seas Complex. Towers 1, Towers 2, Towers 3, and Towers 4. I'm going to go through this again. Towers 1, Towers 2, Towers 1, Towers 2. This is the South Seas West, separate entity, separate condominium association. Towers 1 and 2. This is known as South Seas Northwest, Towers 1 and 2. After a lot of confusion in the industry, the realtors and the attorneys got together and started designating these as 1, 2, 3, and 4 to avoid any confusion to the public. And just real briefly, I had an experience in Towers 2 here. When these were first going up, I contacted the local Deltona office, and I said, I'd like to buy one of those just for investment. Excuse me. And they said, well, we don't have allocations. So typically Deltona would allocate different properties and different agencies throughout. And they said, and I told them I was looking from the 3rd and the 5th floor. I wanted an 11, which was Southwest exposure. And they said, we don't have anything. But you can call our agent, Phil Sims, and he was the agent that was in Venezuela. And I had sold some of his Deltona property before. So I contacted him, and he said, can't do that. But I can't pay you to sell one of those. because I've already got it committed to one of my agents. And I said, I don't care, I just want it for investment. So I ended up buying one in there. And the moral of the story is not about me, but about what happened in the market. I ended up contracting for it. In about 3 months, I paid, I think it was $115,000. About 90 days before the building actually was completed, I had put it on the market for about $195,000. And I only had 10% down. And so I get another agent from another office come and give me a contract and lay it on my desk for just under $185,000. I don't remember the exact number, but just under what I was offering. And I said, let me see it. And I signed it. And she said, don't you want to counter? I said, I'm thinking in my mind, let's see, I've got 15 in it. I'm going to make about 60, 70,000 on this thing. Why would I want to counter on it? This was in like a 1.5 year period. So as it turned out, and this is where I'm going from it, they closed. I got my money right away. Because there was what we were able to do back then, you could sell the contract. So all those people had to do, I signed a piece of paper saying, you have the right to my contract. They gave me 70,000, whatever the number was, and we walked away. Now it's time for this to close. About 3 months, maybe 4 months later, interest rates are now gone up 14, 15, 16%, and people were walking away from these contracts. A lot of towers 3 and 4 were under construction at that point, much slower, just starting. And people were walking away from towers 1 and 2. And so I got out of it very fortunate. It was one of the hardest markets. You talked about the most recent recession. In my opinion, that was a harder market to sell something. I built my house at the same time. And I paid 14% construction loan. Look at today. You can get mortgage rates are 3%. 3.25%. Think of 14%. One further enhancement to that, the usury rate in the state of Florida, which was governed by the state legislators, was 12%, but nobody could sell property. So they ended up saying, if we're going to allow the real estate industry to get back on its feet, we have to raise the usury rate. So the usury rate, you don't know what usury rate is, ask your broker. The usury rate is the maximum anybody can charge for interest on a loan. And they took it up to 18%. And that did jumpstart some activity. Anyway, that's what happened in this complex. And the same thing was for the Summit House, which was another Deltona development, as well as some of the other properties on the mainland, Deltona development. Okay. Let's see. And it's not allowing me to go anyplace, so I'm thinking something happened. Oh, here's more. Okay. Again, Deltona's having financial difficulty. They had to start selling land, selling some of their inventory. They sold 3 properties to a Canadian developer. And they built the Princess Del Mar, the Prince, and the Duchess right on the beach. And those were the first of the, we'll call them luxury condos. And that's where we end. So good luck to everybody. Again, my name is Mark Hughes. I'm John R. Wood. And if you ever have a question about anything, as I tell everybody here, I usually pass my cards out. But I told you where you can reach me if you have any questions about anything.